مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. أنا مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. شئنا أم أبينا، السياسة الخارجية الأميركية في ظل رئاسة دونالد ترامب كانت مختلفة في الجوهر والأسلوب ما جرى سابقا وما يجري الآن. كانت السياسة الخارجية للرئيس ترامب والتي تراعي مبدأ الأميركيون أولا مختلفة عن سياسات الإدارتين الديمقراطية والجمهورية الأحد سواء. جزء من ذلك كان بسبب شخصية الرئيس وأولوياته وما يفضله، والجزء آخر كان مصدره الأشخاص المحيطين به. ولعل مايكل بومبيو هو أهم شخص لعب دورا في تشكيل وتنفيذ سياسة أمريكا الخارجية خلال وجود إدارة ترامب، وربما صوته الآن هو الأكثر تأثيرا في تحديد السياسة الخارجية البديلة للسياسة المتبعة من قبل الرئيس الحالي في البيت الأبيض. ضيفنا اليوم هو وزير خارجية الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية السابق مايكل بومبيو. Welcome back to Dakhel Washington. The issues on the world stage are great and momentous. There is war in Europe. There is challenge in Asia. There is tumult in the continents around the globe. Today, I am delighted to welcome one of America's leading statesmen, a man of great experience, wisdom, and insight, to offer his views on the challenges facing America in the world today and what we should be doing about it. I'm delighted to welcome former Secretary of State, Michael Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for joining us on Dakhel Washington.
My goodness, it is fantastic to be with you. I look forward to our conversation.
Terrific. So let's begin, if we can, with a big question. When you look at the world today, what would you identify as the biggest national security challenge facing the United States?
Goodness, I don't even think it's a particularly close call. It is the increasing bellicosity, the increasing scope and capabilities, and the clear intention of the Chinese Communist Party. Xi Jinping he's not your daddy's chairman. He is a man with a plan and an intention, and is building out a set of capabilities where the model for so long for the Chinese Communist Party was hide your strength and bide your time. And they're done with that. They are now demonstrating day after day their continued efforts to become the global hegemon, whether it's diplomatically. You can see what they're doing even around the island of Taiwan in recent days, and certainly financially, economically, buying land inside the United States, using their renminbi for international trade. No, this is a full-on assault on the way of life that you and I have enjoyed for decades, and it's a full-on assault on the American tradition. In the United States and our allies and friends around the world are going to have to confront this in a serious way.
The issue of China, Mr. Secretary, it seems, at least to an outside observer, seems to be one of the few areas of generally bipartisan shared concern. Are we on the right path nationally in addressing this question?
You know, it's good that there is bipartisanship here. I applaud that. It is going to take a national effort, not a Republican or Democrat effort. It's going to take a national effort over a sustained period of time. That means lots of different configurations of the American political order during that time. So we're talking years and years, maybe decades. But I do worry that this bipartisanship is built on the idea of maybe the lowest common denominator. So I hear the Democrat Party talking, woofing, but every time it comes to difficult actions, ensuring that we don't have Chinese propaganda inside of our country, building out a Defense Department capable of actually confronting the Chinese military and projecting power, the work that we did in the commercial space to prevent the Chinese Communist Party from expanding its ability to steal our stuff here in the United States, and frankly, Western intellectual property more broadly. The Democrat Party hasn't been willing to support any of those things. Look, this is not going to be easy. This is not going to be free. But in the end, America has to prevail in this. And I hope the parties will both come to a place where it's not just about saying, yeah, gosh, sign me up. I'm against the Chinese Communist Party, but prepared to take the real actions that will deliver those outcomes that will protect the American people.
In your view, is war an inevitability?
No, it never is. This is the Reagan model. Deterrence is the answer. It's the objective. The reason one builds a capable military, the reason I was a young lieutenant, wasn't to be able to actually fire my M1 tank in combat. It was to prevent that from ever having to take place. That's why you train and prepare. But the second thing I will say is we won't get to be the sole decider of that. We'll go do our work. We should prepare. We should make clear to the Chinese people and to their leadership that this is gonna be a battle. If we don't, if we appease, we increase the likelihood that Xi Jinping concludes he can do this and that the benefits exceed the costs. Last thought here, the Chinese Communist Party has been at war with the United States for decades. I believe that. I think the Chinese Communist Party believes that. We just pretended it wasn't so. Think about this. Think about the billions of dollars in intellectual property that have been stolen. Think about the fact that today in our major universities, the Chinese Communist Party is underwriting massive research that they're just ripping off from us. They killed tens of millions of American jobs. They've now built out a Pacific Navy and are claiming this region, they call it the 9-dash lines. It's basically all of the South China Sea. They put military installations on these islands, and the United States and the West kind of said, oh, come on, we don't want to create a war. The truth is, the more we talk about being fearful of war, the more likely we are to suffer one. We should do what Ron Reagan did and make clear that war is not our preferred solution, but we're going to, in every dimension, be prepared to protect the things that matter to America. That's how you stop it. It's how you prevent it. It's not inevitable.
Before we move on, just one last sort of China-related question. It doesn't rise to the same level of significance as what we were just talking about, but do you have a view on the great TikTok debate that is roiling Congress these days?
I do. I have three thoughts on TikTok. One, if you're a mom and your kids are watching it, you should stop them. They're stealing your kids' information. They are propagandizing. Gosh knows what your children are being shown. Here's what I know for sure they're being shown. They're being shown things that the Chinese Communist Party would never allow their own kids to be shown. That should tell you something. Second, this is a national security matter in the deepest way. The AI that has been developed around the databases that the Chinese have ripped off from TikTok is of staggering capability, and we should not let that happen. And finally, TikTok is the canary in the coal mine in terms of Chinese technology infiltrating the West. We worked on a bunch of technologies, a company called ZTE, a company called Huawei, each of which, there's a company called WeChat that we worked on too. Each of these are Chinese Communist Party national security tools that we have allowed to infiltrate into the West and spy on us and deliver Chinese messages to us. It's not just about TikTok. This challenge is much greater.
All right. Well, thank you for laying that out. All right, let's move, if we can, from the rising tensions in Asia to a hot war in Europe, Ukraine. When you look at Ukraine, what are the legitimate objectives? What are the stakes for the United States in Ukraine? How do you look at that?
I was actually in Ukraine last week. I took a group of business leaders there. We met with the commercial players in Ukraine. We met with the government leadership. I got a chance to see President Zelensky, whom I had not seen for some 3 years. It is remarkable what they have done. It is also remarkable to see the hell that Vladimir Putin has rained on the Ukrainian people. We traveled to a little town of Irpin, decimated. We saw families who'd lost everything, a town destroyed. This is indecent. It is inhuman. And it is Vladimir Putin's intention, not just for Ukraine, but big chunks of Europe. And that brings me to what's at stake. What's at stake here is a commitment that the United States made in 1994, the Budapest Memorandum, where we said, if you give up your nuclear weapons, we will make sure that you are not invaded. I shorthand, the lawyers would have drafted it differently, but that's what it says. Brits said the same thing. We should live up to that commitment. Second, The Ukrainians haven't asked for our boys and girls. They've just asked for our stuff, our equipment, our know-how, our intelligence, the ability to conduct precision-guided strikes at range. We should have provided that to them a year and a half ago when we first knew this was going to take place, and maybe we wouldn't be involved in a war that is absolutely brutal as we sit here today. Last thought for the American people, there's a lot at stake. I've heard some say this is a territorial dispute. Go ask that 28-year-old girl that I met with when I was in Ukraine. She never lived in the Soviet Union. This isn't a territorial dispute. She's a citizen of Ukraine. That's crazy talk to say it's a territorial dispute. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of America's interests. Our economy has already been impacted. The ability of the United States to be a leader in the world where nations respect our friendship and our adversaries' fearness, it will be diminished, and has been, frankly, by the Biden administration refusing to provide sufficient resources to actually win this thing. And then finally, and this links up to where we began, don't think for a minute that Xi Jinping has not chosen sides and has a preferred outcome here. And he is watching this to decide whether or not he's going to invade, not just Taiwan. We always talk about Taiwan. Don't limit yourself. Xi Jinping's not going to limit himself either. Think about other islands in the Pacific. Think about all the work he'll do to close off trade routes along the Strait of Malacca and the first island chain. Xi Jinping is watching too. Will the West, will those of us who, it's not even just about democracy. Do you believe in property rights? Do you believe in human dignity? Do you think that the international order that has existed since the World War II consensus, do you think that lifted a couple billion people out of poverty? If you believe those things, then you can't let someone like Vladimir Putin prevail. Kyiv in the hands of Vladimir Putin, or Helsinki in the hands of Vladimir Putin, is a nightmare for every family in the United States of America.
So you've explained the stakes. You've explained even its connection to the China challenge. How then does Ukraine end?
Well, predictions are hard, but history is pretty clear. You would know this. These things end with negotiated solutions almost every time. Parties sitting at the table, often with interlocutors, mediators, figuring out what is acceptable to each side. Total victory is the rarest of beasts in civilizational history. So that's almost certainly how this ends. Where the precise lines are drawn, precisely what the outcome is, what the costs imposed on Vladimir Putin will be, those will be sorted through. I do know what America needs in terms of how this ends. That's how, as America's Secretary of State, I always thought about what does America need? America needs this to end as quickly as possible. Thus, we should have provided lots more stuff a lot more quickly. We could have created more chances that we wouldn't be where we are today.
Terrific. When we come back after the break, we're going to shift gears, ask our guest about perhaps his greatest day as Secretary of State, and then the big question about a future for Mike Pompeo in just a moment. Again, my guest today is Michael R. Pompeo, universally known as Mike Pompeo. He has had a quintessentially American story. Born in California, attended the United States Military Academy at West Point, graduating first in his class, served as a cavalry officer, patrolling the Iron Curtain in the final days of the Cold War, then headed for the elite of America's elite law schools, Harvard, where he was an editor of the Harvard Law Review, headed a successful aerospace firm, was president of an oil field equipment company, then got elected to Congress from the state of Kansas, where he served with distinction on the Intelligence Committee and the House Energy and Commerce Committee. In his fourth term, was plucked up by President Trump and asked to serve as Director of Central Intelligence, which he headed for 15 months, and then he was named Secretary of State, the first and only person in American history to serve in both those positions. Now, in private life, he is the author of a new best-selling book, Never Give an Inch, Fighting for the America I Love. I have to ask you, sir, never give an inch is a bit of an odd principle for a diplomat.
No, I get the joke. It may also be true that it's an odd title for someone who was an odd Secretary of State. to think that someone who was running a machine shop in Wichita, Kansas, a few years later would be the Secretary of State for the United States of America is really quite a stretch. Never give an inch. What I meant was, if you read the book, there's lots of places we can compromise. There's lots of places where you say 6, I say 6.5, we settle on 6.2, all good. But on the principles, the central ideas that underpin our country, our founders pretty much nailed it, and you can't compromise on those things. On the ideas of how human beings must treat each other, there's no room to compromise there. You can negotiate outcomes, but on the principles, there's just not any space. And if you make that clear, you're more likely to have negotiations that redound to your country's benefits more often than not.
Fair enough. All right. So I mentioned earlier about what might have been one of your best days in office as Secretary of State. And I know we spoke personally about this not too long ago. The targeted killing of a certain Iranian general, General Soleimani, a victory over of a serious American adversary. What was its goal, and did it achieve its purpose?
That's a good question. Yes and yes. It was a good day, and yes, it achieved its purpose. Look, it's hard to talk about the strike without talking about the Middle East in a broader context. We had a relatively simple theory: Iran bad, Israel good, and we are going to build out a coalition that isolates Iran with the Gulf states that is unequaled in recent history. That was the sort of the objectives. It came by 2019 that the Iranians were back at it again. They were firing artillery at the American embassy in Baghdad almost nightly. They'd taken down an American drone, American unmanned aircraft in international waters. They'd fired ballistic missiles directly from Iran into Abqaiq, a facility in eastern Saudi Arabia that belonged to Saudi Aramco, where we almost lost American lives. We'd lost the very deterrence I spoke about in the segment before. And so I presented to the president a series of options, a couple of which I'd worked on when I was CIA director. And then fate would have it, we caught General Soleimani in the middle of trying to kill even more Americans. He'd killed several hundred during the Gulf Wars. He was back at it again. And then we found enough detail that we figured we could stop that plot. And the best way to stop it was to stop Soleimani himself. He was traveling from Beirut to Damascus and then into Baghdad. And I briefed the president along with Secretary Esper and General Milley at the very end of December of 2019. And he made the bold decision to do what no previous president had been willing to do. Like we'd known, right? We'd all known for a long time, Soleimani's a bad guy. He's got American blood on his hands in spades. But we need to get deterrence back. And I was convinced this would do it. And I was also convinced it wouldn't start World War III, which is what the establishment policy had been. Hands off Soleimani, he's too big a fish. And we took the strike. It was brilliantly executed as a tactical and operational matter. And kudos to the U.S. Department of Defense. We struck Soleimani, his number 2, Muhandis, with no collateral damage. Brilliant operation. But importantly, to your point on the goal, sent the message confirming what I'd sent letters to Soleimani and the Ayatollah about. I'd sent them letters saying, don't screw with us. If you keep messing with us, we're not just going to kill some knucklehead in Iraq, some guy you're paying $20 a month to. We're coming for the leadership. We're coming to Iran. They kept at it, and we lived up to the red line we had drawn, and it worked. Not only did the Iranians stop bothering us, look, deterrence is always temporal. It's never forever. They toned it down. They understood we were different kinds of creatures in this administration. But more importantly, too, Xi Jinping took note. Chairman Kim took note. The Taliban took note. Everyone gets it when America actually says, if you do X, we're going to do Y. And when we do Y in a powerful way, you get the very outcome you intended, which was deter further Iranian aggression.
20 years after Iraq, a dozen years after Libya, the concept of regime change has acquired a pretty bad taste in American foreign policy circles. Is it your preferred approach toward Iran, or do you advocate something else?
The Iranian people are hard at it. You can see it not just in the protests, but even more broadly. They understand that this revolutionary theocracy doesn't have their best interests at heart and isn't consistent with their value set either. So they're hard at it. We should do everything we can to make sure that we create the space for them to do what needs to be done, fundamentally shift the direction of Iran so that it can be invited back into civil society and the world. It will make life better for the Iranian people. It reduces risk for the little Satan in Israel and the great Satan in America too. But it's going to take a determined American. I don't believe the Biden administration has it in them to actually pull that off. I actually understand they're thinking about freeing up $7 billion in resources for the Iranians in exchange for an American hostage. What you're going to get for that is an emboldened Iran, $7 billion richer. You're going to get an American home. That's a good thing. And then you'll have multiple more Americans taken hostage so they can negotiate the next deal. This is foolish. It is unserious, and it appears to be the way that the Biden administration is headed.
So, Mr. Secretary, I have to switch gears since I have you. And you in our opening segment, I noticed that you took, our viewers might not have gotten it, but those of us who live in Washington noticed that you took a little bit of a political shot at a potential candidate for the Republican nomination for president in terms of the Ukraine issue. So let me ask, are you going to be running for president of the United States?
I don't know yet. Susan and I are thinking, praying, trying to figure that out. But in very short order, we'll make that decision. And if we do, we'll go campaign vigorously on the very things we've spoken about today here and the things that matter right here on the home front as well. You know, last thought, it wasn't so much a political shot. I was referring to some remarks Governor DeSantis had made. But I'm worried that in the conservative movement, we've lost our understanding of how it is we actually defend the things that matter. And so it doesn't matter to me who says it, whether that person's thinking about running for president. I'm going to make an argument that is fundamentally different than that each and every day. Whether I run for president or not, these things matter an awful lot.
So whether or not you run for president, if you could reshape American foreign policy to fit your vision of where we would be after 2024, what would be the most significant change that would make this a Pompeo foreign policy?
At the very center would be the restoration of American competence. Not this idea that, oh, goodness gracious, they're 10 feet tall, or we can't do the things we used to do in the world. No, we can absolutely do them. We can fix the problems we have here at home. We can seal our southern border, and we can preserve a world where my kids and grandkids will still love the American freedom that they have here. And we won't be living in a world that trades in renminbi, suffers attacks from the Iranians on our homeland. We don't have to give that up. I think President Reagan nailed it. We got to get it right here at home, and restoring that confidence with building out a robust, capable military that wasn't navel gazing and doing DEI exercises every weekend, a foreign policy that didn't send the 82nd Airborne to solve every problem, but was damn ready to make sure that we had the capability to put resources on target when need be. Those are the kinds of things that an American foreign policy is built around. But if you're an apologetic America and you think that we're a force for bad in the world, there's no foreign policy that can fix that.
Former Secretary of State Michael R. Pompeo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It was great to be with you.
وصلنا إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إن كان لديكم أسئلة أو تعليقات حول البرنامج وبالأخص بشأن شكل السياسة الخارجية الأمريكية في ظل الإدارة الجمهورية التالية، تواصلوا معي رجاء عبر تويتر على هاشتاج إنسايد واشنطن أو راسلوني مباشرة على الرابط @RobSatloff. إلى اللقاء في الأسبوع القادم. حتى ذلك الحين شكرا وإلى اللقاء.